they're like, what is your deal? You know, that's just arrogant or irresponsible, or who do you think you are? And I'm like, that's freedom.
Well, it goes, at least for me, it goes against everything that I was taught.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It goes against it. It goes what I was taught in church, and it goes against what I was taught in business.
Right.
It just goes boom, right against it.
Yeah.
So to be able to just sit back and rest,
right,
and just rest in God and know, and not do anything,
yeah,
and then be amazed and full of joy and freedom when you look around, like you said, your burdens are gone, those things are gone, and you're there, and He's done it all. It's like, wow.
Right.
I witnessed to a former wrestling coach who's Jewish, and his response was, "You're arrogant to even think that God would think of you."
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
That's his mindset.
Yeah.
You're arrogant to think that God would even think of you.
Wow. Well, you're not Jewish.
Right, I'm not. That was his mindset.
Well, yeah, because you're not Jewish.
But
That's what I'm saying.
But even still, I listened to a clip online with R.C. Sproul.
No. That it wasn't that it was a reference about me not being Jewish. He was actually talking about himself.
Oh.
But then you talk about Isaiah. You talk about Isaiah where he says, "Who is man that God is mindful of you?"
Yeah.
I was talking to my daughter the other day, and I just, we were talking about God, and she just said, we talked about, God, knows you, not only the hairs on your head, but just His thoughts towards you are more numerous than all the sand or whatever. And I just said, before this whole creation was even brought into being, God was thinking about you and how much He loved you. That's your value, and that's what your worth is. It's when you start thinking about it, you're just like, God, that's incredible.
I mean, He brought all this forth with us in mind.
Yeah.
He didn't bring this forth apart from us in His mind.
And He brought us forth with Him in mind.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
That's exactly right. The reason why I said that, and this is not to disparage anybody that's Jewish, and not all Jewish people think this way, but a lot of the Jewish rabbis that would have been high up in the Sanhedrin or whatever would have taught that they're the special people of God, and they're waiting for God to reveal them as the special people of God. But then Paul come and said, you're not Jewish after the flesh. A Jew is someone after the heart. Circumcision is of the heart, not of the flesh. Right? So you can't call yourself Jewish according to your flesh.
Yeah, children of Abraham.
Right? It's kind of funny that you mention that. I'm just reading recently in Romans chapter 11, and he's talking about the difference between the Jews and the Gentiles. And he says an interesting thing. He says, and actually in this little verse explains that whole chapter. But he says, if the first fruits is holy, then the whole lump is holy. And if the root is holy, then so are the branches. And he's trying to communicate to us that holiness or innocence between you and God, and just moral purity of heart and mind and soul, all those things comes from our connection with the one who is the first fruits of all of that.
Yeah.
And because of our connection with Him, we also are holy. Now, in the Jewish mind, they would look at something like that and say, listen, to believe that you don't have something and to be working toward that thing, that is humility. But the way God views humility is He says something about us that is true, and we submit in humility to what He says is true about us. And if He says the first fruits is holy, thus the whole lump is holy, that is what humility actually is.
Yeah.
And that's how you can explain that to someone.
And Jesus wasn't the firstborn according to Jewish after the flesh. He was the firstborn of humankind from the dead. So He's the first fruit.
Yeah.
So if He be holy, then the whole lump is holy.
Absolutely.
Not just Jewish people.
That's right.
He wasn't raised up Jewish after the flesh. That's why Paul said, we used to know Him after the flesh, but we no longer know Him that way. Right? Before He died and was raised from the dead, we knew that guy according to Him being Jewish. But now that He's been raised from the dead, we see that He hasn't been raised from the dead by the power of the flesh. So we no longer know that guy after the flesh. We now know Him according to the Spirit, and the Spirit does not define people by Jew or Gentile. And so He's the first fruit of all humankind, and if He be holy, then Jew and Gentile are holy. Right? They've been cleansed. That's beautiful what it says there. And the whole idea of the promise of the resurrection isn't to fill our minds with one day we'll have life.
That's right.
Yeah.
There you go.
The promise of the resurrection is that when we're confronted with the contradiction in this world trying to tell us we lack life, that we see the promise of the resurrection is, which is that he who has the Son has life, and this life is ever growing and ever swallowing all corruption, all death, and all darkness. And so it's meant to persuade us that we have life, we don't lack life, and even the life that we have will swallow all death and darkness that we see anywhere in the world. And that gives us a certainty that not only do we have life, but nothing can take it. Nothing that comes against this life can subtract from it, because we see that this life swallows up chaos, it swallows up darkness, it swallows up death, it swallows up all that stuff. And then that puts us to rest. Because what will torment us is to think that we're being conquered by death, or we're being conquered by some ailment or something that's coming against us, or something is taking life from us. That don't feel nice when we think that's going on, right? That's a woe is me kind of a thing. And then what happens is we're tempted to labor to try to bring forth life ourselves. And that's kind of what Paul's, it's a profound thing that Paul said, and it's amazing how many things God has to move out of the way before you can actually see what ails somebody. Listen to what Paul said in Romans 7. He describes the whole dilemma. Who shall save me from this body of death? So he says, my soul is being tormented. I'm experiencing heartache and anguish. The thing that's bringing it to me is this body of death I have. That's what he says there. He says, the thing that's causing this body of death. He says, I look at my body, I see it's perishing. And I look at my body and I see it's all the time bringing forth the fruit of death. And that is tormenting my soul. He said, and then I see something else. That the more I try to clothe upon myself with life, it only brings forth more death. And then that leaves me feeling like, oh, wretched man that I am, because of I don't have life, I have death. And I see that the more I try to clothe upon myself with life, it actually brings forth more death. And he talks about that dynamic causes him to think he's a wretched human being. Look at me. I'm the forsaken of God. I'm the smitten and stricken of God. Who shall save me from that? He says. And then he describes the whole thing. I thank God for our Lord Jesus Christ. And then he goes into the spirit of what? What does he call the spirit there? The spirit of life. Then he talks about the body of death. He continues, he says, death was condemned in the flesh of Jesus. He says that's how he's saved from the effect of his body of death. He sees the death he saw himself clothed in. He actually sees that death wrapped around Jesus on the cross. And he sees that that death was condemned in the flesh of Jesus, in his death and in his resurrection, because Jesus came out of the resurrection with what? A body of life. And then he saw that spirit of life now clothing his body of death. And what that did was it condemned the effect of lack in his heart. It condemned the effect of I come behind in some area in his heart. And so nothing that could then come against him anymore could tell him he was separated from life. Nothing that could come against him from then on could keep him from experiencing peace and love and joy, right? He was no longer laboring and toiling to clothe himself with peace and love and joy. He could see that God had done something to bring forth peace and love and joy. And nothing can separate me from the love of God, right? And that's the thing that actually ails us, is the body of death.
Right.
We think what ails us is that God was angry with us because of our sin.
Right.
And that whole thing where it talks in the Bible, it's okay, where it talks about set your affection on things above. It's to think for so long about, well, what's heaven going to be like, and this and this and this, and I'm realizing that actually setting your affection on the things above is setting your affection totally on Christ. And that your life is hidden in him. It's not about everything's going to be wonderful and perfect and rosy, and
His life is my life.
His life is my life.
And that will restore your soul.
Yeah, because it takes your focus.
There's no shame in your soul being subverted. We don't like to hear that, right? Listen, I've lost a lot of viewers in the last year and a half because I've been hammering that thing about how we're dead to the life that's of the world.
Right.
People don't want to hear that because, we are in America, and America has turned the gospel into the 10-step program to get the American dream.
Yep.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And so that's what we're busy with the gospel. But the thing I'm actually preaching is actually the key to enjoying life.
Yeah.
But it doesn't fit in line with what people have the image they have in their head of enjoying life. Right?
Yeah.
I used to think if I could just get free from being intense, I would never feel subverted again and I could have life. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, let me try to justify myself through my intensity. Right? Whether I'm intense or not is neither good nor evil.
Right.
right? I don't want to define myself by that kind of thing. And what I find happen is sometimes I still feel like, oh, crap, what the hell, man? My God. I mean, I find myself talking to myself when I walk out of the church. I'll be like, what are you going to do? You know? Like my head will start playing how I must have sounded up there, how I went blank, and who knows what came out of me, but I just know I turned into a maniac. And I'm just like, oh, Lord, how can I keep doing this? And I'm like, what are you going to do? And so what I used to think that I needed to get rid of that experience to have life. And so I was always focused on that experience. That brought me great pain. And what I was doing, I was judging myself by my knowledge of good and evil, which I said, it's good if that never happens, and it's evil if it does.
That's right.
Well, then every time it happened, what do you think I felt? Torment. But when God came and lifted that judgment and said, hey, Greg, it's neither good nor evil that you feel that way. It's just that this world has pressed in on you. Fear not. Right? And then once he removed that judgment of good and evil about the situation, I no longer judged it to be a word that I'm not as I ought to be because my soul field pressed in on. Listen, I could feel that pressing in on, and it would come and it would go. Like quick like. You know, it wouldn't like hang out. I wouldn't go forward in the week thinking about how can I prevent that from happening. Right? What can I do so that I can say what I want to say? What can I do so my mind doesn't go blank? What can I do? You see, my mind was all the time filled with that. Now my mind isn't filled with that. You know what my mind's filled with? You know what? I may get up there and freaking go blank. And who knows what might happen? You know what? Oh well. His life is my life. Do you see what I'm saying? Our life isn't braided together. My life is not braided together with that.
Right.
My life is braided together with God. So I'm not going to judge the life that I have by whether I feel subverted or not. Right? I'm not braided together with that. I'm braided together with God and His life. And so the more my heart is gravitating towards that, the more these things, these pressing ins, they come and they go. They come and they go. They don't camp out where you're just stuck thinking on it, meditating on it, blah, 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 blah. You know? And then you get free. And then you're free to do the thing that's in your heart to do, whether you feel pressed in on or not. Right?
Yes.
You find great strength manifesting in you.
Yes.
And you can't, and the